Do you happen to remember that weird time back in the late 2000s? Everyone seemed to be talking about this phenomenon called the Mayan calendar and how it marked the end of the world. Well, if not, here's a refresher. On December 21st, 2012, the Mesoamerican long count calendar, or the Mayan calendar, ended its 5,126-year-long cycle. The years leading to the date featured several movies based on the supposed doomsday, and TV programs cashed in on the phenomenon. Since then, the period became known as the 2012 phenomenon, which describes a range of beliefs suggesting a cataclysmic or transformative event would occur on or around the ending of the Mesoamerican calendar. According to some New Age theories, the date marked the start of a period where Earth and humanity would experience a physical or spiritual transformation and enter a new era, for better or worse. It's a little unclear on how or why this was going to happen. However, I do remember something about the transition to the age of Aquarius. However, there were also other theories about this date as well. Others suggested that the 2012 date marked the end of the world, brought about by a global catastrophe. This one was a little more scientific, I'm putting in quotes, and at least provided some rationale. Proponents suggested that the next solar maximum would produce an interaction between Earth and a supermassive black hole, Sagittarius A, at the center of the galaxy. The alignment between the Sun, Earth, and the black hole would create a combined gravitational effect, creating havoc on Earth somehow, possibly a giant tsunami or a breakdown of social order. Astronomers, Mayan scholars, and other researchers quickly tried to debunk the prevailing theories about the end of the world, which only really drew more attention to these theories. Archaeologists insisted that the idea of the Mayan long count calendar ending in 2012 was a misconception about Mayan culture, which, in retrospect, it was. While astronomers rejected the various proposed doomsday scenarios as pseudoscientific, in fact, there would be no major astronomical event marking December 21st. Nevertheless, the idea spread widely throughout the public, especially via the internet. In May 2012, an Ipsos poll of 16,000 adults in 21 countries found that 8% had experienced anxiety over the possibility of the world ending, while about 10% agreed that the ending of the Mayan calendar marked the end of the world. In the United States, sales for blast shelters increased substantially leading up to the event. Many of the construction companies promoted fallout shelters, cashing in on the phenomenon and fanned the flames by using the 2012 doomsday within their advertisements. In the end, nothing really happened that day, and it seemed to be just another case of doomsday prophecies unfulfilled. Apocalyptic ideas have been present in human societies for as long as civilizations have existed. There really has always been this idea among people that certain esoteric knowledge could be used to predict a major catastrophe or some kind of confrontation between the forces of good and evil. The event, of course, would fundamentally alter the course of human history. To be sure, there have been many instances of the apocalyptic prophecies throughout human history. One of the earliest in Western culture dates to roughly 634 BC, when Romans feared that their city would be destroyed after 120 years because 12 eagles had flown over Romulus during the city's creation. Pope Sylvester II predicted 1000 AD would be the end of days. A more modern one also occurred in 1910, when many people in the United States and Europe assumed the passing of Halley's Comet would bring the end of the world on the 18th of May that year. And of course, a more recent one would be the Y2K glitch in 1999, as well as the fears around June 6, 2006, which captured people's imagination and incited some modest panic. The early 2000s witnessed a relative uptick in doomsday predictions, brought about by all sorts of fears. However, there is one apocalyptic prediction that the 2012 phenomenon bears a keen likeness to that I would like to talk about today. That one being the Great Conjunction of 1524, or what many in Europe during the time believed to be the second great flooding of the world. First, I would like to thank you for visiting my channel. Here, I create videos on various historical events. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. Anyways, thanks for visiting, and back to the video. Before we begin, let's talk about the first great flood. In the book of Genesis, chapters 6 through 9 in the Hebrew Bible, it tells the story of the time when the Hebrew God warned Noah to build a massive ark and house a variety of animals aboard it to await out the massive deluge. Essentially, God had become dissatisfied with how the earth had become filled with violence and corruption and decided to flood the world to wipe the slate clean. In the end, God made a covenant with Noah allowing humans to consume animals, and God would never again flood the world. The story might be familiar to most people watching this. So that brings us to the 16th century. For most of the medieval period in Europe, there was a tendency for the church to discourage apocalyptic ideas, particularly by de-emphasizing historical change and placing closer attention on the fate of humans after death. In the late Middle Ages, there was also a resurgence of classic divinatory methods such as astrology, which became popular in Europe, especially during the Renaissance. In particular, the rediscovery of Neoplatonic and Hermetic philosophy from antiquity via Europe's interaction with the Muslim world rekindled astrology and its practice in mainstream society. During the Renaissance, astrology was thought to provide explanations for birth, death, and the decline of the material world. It was centrally based on the idea that celestial bodies and the zodiac linked the world to the great chain of being. It connected the Platonic world of ideas and phenomenons of the universe housed within the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. So, what is astrology? Well, you might be most familiar with the 12 zodiacs and daily horoscopes. Astrologers claim to be able to discern information about human affairs and terrestrial events by examining the position of celestial objects like the stars and planets visible in the night sky. It's a very old practice dating back to around the 2nd millennium BCE. The origin are assumed to have originated in agricultural societies to predict seasonal shifts and plot calendrical systems. It wasn't really until the 18th century Enlightenment that these ideas became dismissed in most Western societies. So humans have a quite large history with astrology. For the most part, most societies practice some form of astrology. Even today, astrology is widely practiced in many parts of the world, even the United States and in Europe. For intellectuals in the Renaissance, astrology provided a sense of existential security and confidence to humanity through a vision of an ordered cosmos, where spirituality united all things in existence. The zodiac and the planets in the heavens were unmovable and well constructed, providing a perfect symmetry for the universe. Europeans used astrology to answer various philosophical and existential questions in areas like politics, art, religion, medicine, agriculture, and even daily life. Astrologists provided prenatal advice, served as matchmakers and marriage advisors. They even provided financial advice to bankers and advised kings and princes on politics and warfare. By the Renaissance, European astrologers were already very familiar with writings by Arab scholars. Great astrologer Abu Mashar's work on the Grand Conjunction was considered a canonical text in many universities and religious schools within Europe. Latin translations of the text had already been available since at least the 12th century. Mashar's work systemically presents the theory of the Grand Conjunctions and the Little Prophet, who would one day arrive from a country that stood under the sign of Scorpio. He goes on to describe the person's physical form, character, manner, and how the Little Prophet would attract many people to his new doctrine. However, the work did not detail what religion the Little Prophet would belong to. The general prediction was widely known to European astrologers when they began studying the Grand Conjunction of 1484, and they keenly awaited the Little Prophet's arrival. It was through Mashar's work and the resurgence of astrology that Europeans became more interested in prophetic predictions. However, while studying the conjunction in 1484, astrologers began to notice a particularity signaled by the stars and planetary alignments. But first, what is the Grand Conjunction? Well, it is a period when Saturn and Jupiter appear the closest together in the night sky. They occur approximately every 20 years, and for astrologers, this had significance. The conjunctions also pass through the night sky aligning with different zodiac symbols, which foretold different omens. They noticed that the conjunction was moving out of Scorpio towards Pisces, which was a bad omen. Astrologers concluded it meant one thing: another great flood would arrive within the next two conjunctions, which would eventually send waves of panic throughout Europe. The expanding interest in apocalyptic notions drew from key biblical texts like the books of Daniel and Revelation, but also the Calabrian Cistercian Joachim of Fiore, who lived from roughly 1135 to 1202 AD. Joachim suggested three ages of spiritual fulfillment: the Father, the Old Testament, and the Son, the New Testament, would be followed by the age of the Holy Spirit, a final period of spiritual fulfillment. Most astrologers took this to mean that this new great flood in 1524 would enter a new age for humanity. Italian and German astrologers studied the conjunction closely and predicted that the 1524 conjunction would be the grandest. At this time, it would not be just Saturn and Jupiter aligning, but all 7 planets. They would join together on February 1524 to form a super conjunction. However, this time, rather than passing through Scorpio, it would in fact pass over Pisces, a zodiac sign long associated with the biblical flood. For astrologists, this did not augur well. They predicted massive tides would sweep away cities across the world. This would become known as the flood prediction. Adding fuel to the panic, in 1515, a Viennese astrologer, George Transtatter, added the prediction that a new schism between the people and the church would be evidence of an approach of universal disaster, which many took to mean the next great flood. 2 years later, in 1517, Martin Luther initiated the Protestant Reformation. He publicly denounced abuses of the church in the 95 Theses stapled to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. The 1484 prediction of the Little Prophet had been realized. The debates and conflicts within the church to follow allowed apprehensions about the catastrophic flood to reach new heights in German and Italian states in subsequent years. The prediction was widely disseminated due to one recent development: the production of Europe's printing press by Johannes Gutenberg. The new printing technology spread the idea throughout Central Europe. Printers churned out hundreds of leaflets about the prediction and stoked fear and panic. The printing press not only made mass production of books possible, but also smaller written works too. Since 1499, the printing of pamphlets had caught on in Germany and spread throughout Europe. In a short time, several thousand copies of pamphlets could be produced, most especially about the prediction of the Great Flood. What turned the esoteric beliefs about the Great Flood into common knowledge and widespread popular concern was the publication of Johannes Stoffler and Jacob Flom's pamphlets in the year of 1499. The two astrologers' calculations showed that the Great Conjunction would occur in the watery sign of Pisces in February 1524, spelling disaster for humankind. The predictions of the Second Flood became widespread, latching on to the collective fear and heated debates among astrologers and theologians, among both Catholics and Lutherans. The Black Plague, famine, religious crisis, and general political instability contributed to a climate of intense hopes and fears. In 1521, Johannes Karian published a new set of pamphlets depicting the flood. The images showed the breakdown of social order to come as peasants revolted and set about murdering the clergy. It was such a large phenomenon that an estimated 60 writers published predictions about the Great Flood up to February 1524. Knowledge about the imminent catastrophe quickly spread throughout Europe and even to the British Isles. The most well-documented event leading to the Great Flood occurred in England, as a group of London astrologers, following their counterparts on the continent, examined the esoteric signs and came to the same conclusion. A cataclysmic flood would imminently strike London and become the first of many signs pointing to the start of the end of times. They claimed the waters of the Thames would swell to such heights as to overflow the whole city of London and wash away 10,000 houses. 20,000 London residents abandoned their homes in Campden Hempstead and the North Downs. At the time, London had a population of about 50,000 people, so about 2/5 abandoned the city in the days leading to the supposed flood. The wealthier segments of London even joined in, moving to higher ground in Highgate, Hampstead, and Blackheath. Famously, William Bolton, prior of St. Bartholomew, erected a tower at his home in Harrow to serve as a refuge from the flood waters. The night before the final date, he along with his servants and friends stocked the tower with provisions sufficient for several months to wait out the flood waters. Then, on the morning of February 1st, 1524, the crowds gathered outside London to watch the Thames overflow and sweep away the city. But the river never rose. They watched and waited until sunset and still nothing. Eventually, most of the crowd had reconciled that the flood was not going to happen, but others continued to wait on higher ground and even stayed until the next morning, fearful the floods would still come. February passed and the floods never came. In fact, the rains for the remaining months of 1524 ended up being a little drier than usual. The prophets of the calamity, of course, did not admit fault and instead blamed human error. The calculations were off by a few hundred years, they said, but it was certainly not coming. However, the damage was done and the reputation of astrologers diminished. The failure of the prophecy to materialize undermined European faith within astrology, and the study gradually declined for the rest of the century. So what caused people to become caught up in the doomsday prophecy? Well, it had a lot to do with major upheavals throughout Europe. By the 16th century, people had been enduring famine, plague, and continuous warfare. Urban populations were expanding and economic shifts were underway. Social dislocation and suffering happened to produce conditions ripe for talk of revolution as well as apocalypticism. So what does this event have to say about our society in 21st century? Most talk about the Mayan apocalypse occurred in roughly 2008 and 2009 during the time of the Great Recession. People at that time were grappling with the prospect for financial ruin, fears of job loss, difficulty finding jobs, and many other things. In many ways, these sorts of doomsday predictions are representative of people's anxieties and fears. It says much about how people attempt to process turbulent times within their present society. I remember, for instance, that the Mayan apocalypse was first predicted for November 11th, 2011, or 11/11/11, but when it didn't happen, suddenly there was a miscalculation and the date shifted to the following year. By 2012, society had slowly begun to recover from the Great Recession, and people are a bit more positive. As well, the date fell around Christmas time, so I suspect a lot of people kind of forgot about it because their vacations were close around the corner. Similar to the 1524 flood prediction, what aided the dissemination of the 2012 doomsday was new technology, particularly the internet, which had become more widely available than the decade prior. For the most part, the doomsday of 2012 as well as the one in 1524 has largely been forgotten and has had little cultural impact to this day. But certainly, as time goes on, more predictions about the end of the world will inevitably follow. But that's all I have for you today. If you made it to the end of this video, I am eternally grateful. If you found this video helpful and informative, please press the like button and consider subscribing for more historical videos. Thanks a lot, and I hope to see you in the next video.